speech that no one forgot. The hall was full. Cameras flashed like restless fireflies, microphones pointed in every direction, and the sound of shuffling chairs echoed through the giant auditorium. Every seat was taken, and yet people still stood against the walls, craning their necks just to catch a glimpse of the man who had quietly changed the way millions lived their daily lives. Sundar Pichai walked toward the stage slowly, almost shyly, the way someone would approach a group of close friends rather than a crowd of thousands. His steps were measured, his eyes calm, his hands folded in front of him as if even in that charged moment he was reminding himself to remain grounded. In the very front row sat Modi ji, his expression unreadable, his fingers clasped together, his gaze fixed firmly on Sundar. The audience had been buzzing moments earlier, but as Sundar reached the podium, silence fell like a curtain. It was not the heavy silence of fear, but the expectant quiet of people who knew they were about to hear something that would matter, something that would stay with them long after the evening was over. Sundar adjusted the microphone, looked down for a brief second, and then began to speak in his soft, steady voice. He did not rush. He never did. His words flowed like water, gentle but powerful, simple yet heavy with meaning. He spoke of his childhood in a modest home in Chennai, of the nights when electricity would flicker out, and his family would sit in the dim light of a lantern, waiting for the fan to start again. He spoke of standing in long lines with his father to make phone calls from shared telephones, each call a precious reminder that technology was more than wires and circuits. It was a bridge between people. The crowd leaned closer. There was no drama in his delivery, no attempt to impress with grand gestures, and yet every word pulled at the heart like a quiet song of resilience. Sundar spoke of how his father saved money for months to buy the family's first refrigerator, and how he, as a boy, marveled at the wonder of cool water on a scorching day. He recalled the excitement of holding his first transistor radio, turning the dial slowly, amazed that invisible waves in the air could carry voices from far away. Then he paused, letting the silence breathe. He looked up at the audience, and for a moment his eyes seemed to meet every pair of eyes in that hall. He said, "Technology is not about machines, it is about people. It is about respect, about dignity, about giving someone in a small town the same chance as someone born in a city. It is about making sure no child feels left behind just because he was born without access to what others take for granted." The hall erupted in applause, but Sundar raised his hand gently, and the clapping stopped. He was not finished. His tone grew heavier, his words slower, as if he wanted each syllable to carve itself into the heart of everyone listening. "I stand here not because I am extraordinary," he continued, "but because ordinary people lifted me up. My teachers, who stayed after class to explain what I did not understand, my parents who sacrificed their comfort so I could learn, my friends who reminded me to never stop dreaming even when life seemed too difficult. I am here because of kindness, and that is why I believe the greatest measure of technology is not how advanced it is, but how much kindness it can spread." Tears welled up in the eyes of many in the audience. Some thought of their own struggles, some thought of their parents' sacrifices, and some simply felt the weight of truth in his words. Sundar was not selling a vision of machines or profits. He was painting a picture of humanity itself, and in that picture everyone could see a part of themselves. Then came the twist. He closed his speech not with the usual polished line or rehearsed statement, but with something unexpected, something that left the hall stunned. "Tonight I want to make a promise," he said, his voice steady. "Wherever I go, whatever I build, I will never forget the power of humility. I will never forget that the true leaders are not the ones who stand on the stage, but the ones who sit quietly in the audience cheering others on. The real heroes are not the ones with the microphone, but the ones who live with kindness every single day." And then, without waiting for the applause, without looking back, Sundar simply walked away from the podium. The audience sat in silence, shocked. No one moved for several seconds. The speech was over, but Sundar had not paused for recognition, had not accepted the applause that was certain to follow. He had walked away with the same quiet humility with which he had walked toward the stage. But it was not the end. Modi ji leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing, his lips pressing together as if he was about to speak. The room buzzed, again whispers floating through the air. Some wondered if Sundar had offended the Prime Minister by leaving so abruptly. Others thought perhaps it was a planned gesture, but no one really knew what would happen next. Then Modi ji rose slowly from his chair. Every head turned. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing each second, each movement. He looked toward the direction where Sundar had disappeared behind the stage. And then he did something no one in that hall had expected. He stepped up toward the podium. The hall fell silent once more. People held their breath waiting, and with that step, a moment began that would change everything. Modi ji's unexpected step. The air in the hall felt heavy, as if every breath carried the weight of uncertainty. Sundar had left the stage without waiting for recognition, and the people who had come expecting a polished ending were instead left with silence. No one clapped. No one spoke, because everyone sensed that something unusual was about to unfold. Modi ji stood slowly, his figure calm yet commanding, his eyes fixed on the very place where Sundar had disappeared. In that moment, time seemed to pause. The crowd, which had been restless seconds earlier, now sat frozen. Some felt admiration for Sundar's humility, others felt confusion, and a few even worried that his quiet walk might be seen as disrespectful. But then Modi ji placed both hands on the podium and leaned forward slightly, as if gathering not just his thoughts, but the collective attention of everyone in the hall. His voice was deep, steady, and carried a weight that could not be ignored. "You all came here to hear a speech from one of India's proudest sons," he began, "and you heard it. But what you did not expect perhaps was what came after. The walk away, the silence, the reminder that true greatness does not wait for applause." The audience murmured softly, surprised that Modi ji was acknowledging Sundar's exit directly. "We live in a time," Modi ji continued, "when leaders often want the last word, when men want to be remembered for what they said, rather than how they lived. But today, in this hall, we saw something different. Sundar Pichai walked away not because he had nothing more to say, but because his actions have already spoken louder than any words ever could." Applause broke out, hesitant, at first then swelling until the entire hall thundered with it. People stood on their feet, clapping not only for Sundar's humility but also for the way Modi ji had honored it. Yet Modi ji raised his hand, and the applause softened again. He wasn't finished. His tone shifted, becoming more intimate as though he was speaking to each person individually. "Do you know what it means to be humble in a world where pride sells faster than truth? It means to carry a quiet strength, to let your dignity speak for you." Sundar did not stay for applause, because applause was never his destination. His destination has always been respect, and respect cannot be demanded. It can only be earned. The words fell into the hearts of those listening like drops of rain on dry soil. People nodded slowly, many wiping away tears they didn't expect to shed at a technology conference. There was something raw, something human, in that exchange between Sundar and Modi ji, something that made everyone present question their own definitions of success. Then Modi ji did something no one could have predicted. He stepped away from the podium, walked toward the side of the stage where Sundar had disappeared, and with a deliberate motion, he beckoned for Sundar to return. The backstage curtain stirred. For a brief moment, nothing happened, and tension climbed higher. Had Sundar already left the building? Was he too humble to come back? Whispers spread across the hall like ripples in water. But then, slowly, Sundar emerged, his expression calm but slightly hesitant, as though unsure of what awaited him. The audience erupted again, but this time the sound was not just applause. It was relief, joy, admiration. Sundar walked onto the stage and Modi ji extended his hand. The two men shook hands firmly, their eyes locking in a quiet exchange that needed no translation. It was a moment of mutual respect. The leader of a nation and the leader of a global company, bound together, not by power, but by humility. Modi ji raised their joined hands high in the air and the hall exploded in cheers. Journalists captured the moment furiously, flashes bursting like fireworks. But beneath the spectacle was a deeper truth. This was not about politics, nor business, nor even technology. It was about the power of humanity, the reminder that kindness and humility were forces stronger than ambition alone. As the applause thundered, Sundar leaned toward the microphone once more. His voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I only wanted to remind us all," he said, "that respect is never one-sided. It flows both ways. I am here because of the love of this land, and I will always carry it with me." Modiji placed a hand on Sundar's shoulder, and for a brief second both men simply stood there smiling. It was a picture that many would never forget. But then, just as the moment seemed complete, something unexpected happened. A voice from the audience shouted, trembling with emotion, "Sundar, tell them the truth about what you faced." The room fell silent again. Sundar froze. Modiji looked at him, puzzled, waiting. The crowd shifted uneasily, unsure of what the man had meant. Sundar inhaled deeply, and the softness in his face gave way to something heavier. He stepped forward, his eyes lowering as though he was looking back in time, far away from the grandeur of the stage. And then he began to speak. Not about his success, not about his company, but about the pain, the struggles, the hidden battles that few had ever known. The truth beneath the success. The hall was silent, as if every breath had been stolen by the single voice that had dared to rise above the thousands. Sundar stood there, his hand still lightly brushing the microphone, his eyes distant. He seemed to drift back into a world only he could see, a world that had shaped him long before the bright lights of Silicon Valley and the cheers of the crowd. The moment stretched, heavy, fragile, until finally he spoke. "There is something I have not shared often," Sundar said quietly, his words trembling at first but then growing stronger, steadier. "People see the man standing here today, but they do not see the boy I once was, struggling in silence. I came from a small house where every rupee mattered. I wore shoes with holes in them, and there were days when I carried books wrapped in old newspapers because we could not afford proper covers. I studied by candlelight, not because it was poetic, but because power cuts were normal and candles were cheaper than kerosene lamps." The audience leaned forward, their faces reflecting a mix of empathy and disbelief. Many had known he came from modest beginnings, but few had imagined the raw truth of those early struggles. Sundar's voice dipped lower, carrying a weight that filled every corner of the hall. "I was often told that dreams like mine were too big, that I should settle, that I should not aim so high. I remember the first time I applied to study abroad. I was rejected, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Each rejection letter felt like the world was telling me I was not good enough, that I did not belong, and I almost believed it." Gasps spread through the crowd. The story of Sundar Pichai was usually told as one of smooth success, a steady climb. Hearing him confess to repeated rejection, to almost giving up, felt like peeling back a curtain to reveal a vulnerable human being, instead of an untouchable icon. He paused, his eyes glistening, and for the first time since he had walked onto the stage, his voice broke. "I remember sitting alone one night after my 3rd rejection. I felt empty. I wondered if my father had wasted his sacrifices on me. I even thought, maybe I should stop dreaming, maybe life would be easier if I just accepted my place." Silence in the hall was deafening. People who had come expecting inspiration now found themselves holding back tears. The story was no longer about success. It was about the quiet wars fought within one's own heart. Sundar continued, his tone rising with quiet resilience. "But then, I thought of my mother. I thought of the nights she would sit beside me, holding a fan in her hand, waving it gently over me so I could sleep in the heat when the power was gone. She never complained. She never asked for anything. She only wanted me to try, one more time, always one more time. And so, I tried again." The hall erupted in applause, not the loud clapping of entertainment, but the raw sound of people moved to their core. Modiji himself watched intently, his eyes reflecting deep respect. But Sundar was not finished. "When I finally reached America," he said, "I carried only a suitcase and a blanket my mother gave me. I was excited, but I was also lost. I could barely afford food, and there were days I ate only one meal. I was made fun of for my accent, for my clothes, for being different. Sometimes professors praised me, but sometimes people looked at me as though I did not deserve to be there. I smiled on the outside, but inside I felt the sting of not belonging. I learned then that success is not just about intelligence. It is about resilience, about standing up when the world pushes you down again and again. The audience sat spellbound. Some students in the crowd nodded furiously, as if his words were describing their own lives. Parents squeezed their children's hands, silently reminding them that struggles did not mean failure. Sundar took a long breath, then added, "The truth is, I did not walk an easy road, but every wound taught me something. Humility, patience, respect. I learned that kindness is not weakness, it is strength. Because when you have nothing, the smallest kindness can mean everything. I promised myself then that if I ever stood in a place of power, I would never forget the pain of being powerless." The words sank into the hall like stones, dropping into still water. Modi ji shifted slightly, clearly moved. Journalists scribbled furiously, aware that history was being made not through grand announcements, but through raw honesty. Then came another twist. Sundar's voice darkened slightly, almost a whispering. "But there is more. There was a moment when I almost gave up completely, when I thought of leaving everything behind. I never told anyone this, not even my family. It was the lowest point of my life, and I carry it with me even today." He stopped there. The crowd stirred, desperate to know more. Modi ji leaned forward, his eyes searching Sundar's face. "What moment was that?" Someone called from the audience, their voice trembling. Sundar looked down, his hands tightening, on the podium. "If I tell you," he said slowly, "you may see me differently. You may not see the CEO of Google. You may not see the man standing here. You will see the broken boy I once was, and perhaps you will judge him." The tension in the hall became unbearable. Every eye was fixed on him, every heart beating faster, and then Sundar lifted his head, his voice steady once more. "But maybe it is time. Maybe the world needs to hear it." He took one step forward, opened his mouth to speak, and the darkest night, the hall waited, heavy with silence. Sundar's eyes lingered on the floor, his fingers gripping the podium tightly as if anchoring himself to the moment. The weight of his pause felt unbearable. People leaned forward unconsciously, afraid to blink and miss the words that were about to come. Even Modi ji, who had spoken with such certainty minutes earlier, now looked at Sundar not as a statesman, but as a man searching for truth from another man's heart. Finally, Sundar lifted his head. His voice was softer than before, almost trembling, yet every word cut through the silence like a blade. "There was a time when I felt so small, so invisible, that I wondered if the world would even notice if I disappeared. I was in my early days in America, far away from home, surrounded by brilliance, yet feeling completely alone. I had no money. I had no friends nearby. I walked to class in the cold because I could not afford the bus. My shoes were thin, my jacket too light, and the winter wind felt like knives against my skin." He stopped, his throat tightening. The audience held their breath. "One night," Sundar continued, "after receiving yet another rejection, after being told once again that I did not belong, I sat on a park bench. I had only $1 in my pocket. I had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. And as I sat there, I thought, maybe I should give up. Maybe I should stop chasing dreams that seemed too far for a boy from Chennai. Maybe it would be easier to go back, to accept what life gave me and stop fighting for more." In that moment, I felt the cold touch of hopelessness for the first time. The words struck the audience like a storm. People shifted uneasily, tears shining in many eyes. Some whispered prayers under their breath. It was almost impossible to imagine that the man standing tall before them had once sat broken and hungry on a lonely bench in a foreign land. Sundar's eyes grew distant, as if reliving that night. "But as I sat there," he said, "something happened. I remembered my father's voice. I remembered how he once told me that life will test you. It will push you to your knees. But if you stay there, then you have already lost. I remembered my mother's quiet smile, the way she never let hardship steal her kindness, and I thought, if they could keep going, then how could I give up so easily? If they sacrificed so much for me, how could I throw it away in one night of weakness? His voice grew stronger, steadier, carrying a pulse of determination that spread through the room. So I stood up. I used that $1 to buy a loaf of bread, and I promised myself that I would survive one more day. Just one more. And the next day, I made the same promise again. I kept surviving one day at a time until the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into years. And that is how I learned that resilience is not about never falling. It is about choosing to rise again and again, no matter how heavy the fall. The hall erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, clapping with tears streaming down their faces. Some shouted words of encouragement, others simply held their hands over their hearts. The atmosphere was electric, not with power, but with shared humanity. Sundar waited quietly until the applause faded, then added in a lower tone, "But here is something I want you to remember. Every person you meet might be fighting their own bench in the park moment. You may never see it. You may never hear it, but it is there. That is why kindness matters. That is why respect matters. Because sometimes even a single kind word can pull someone back from the edge." Modiji's face softened. He nodded slowly, visibly moved, and for once even the journalists lowered their pens, as if realizing this was not a moment to be documented but to be felt. Yet just as the hall seemed filled with hope, a new voice rose from the back. Sharp, direct, almost challenging. "But Sundar," the voice called out, "what about the world today? Technology divides as much as it connects. It spreads hate as much as it spreads love. How can kindness survive in a world where machines are stronger than hearts?" The question hung in the air, heavy and provocative. The audience turned to look at the man who had asked it, his face partly hidden in the shadows. Sundar blinked, caught off guard for the first time that evening. Modiji turned toward him too, waiting to see how he would respond. The air grew tense once more. The story of Sundar's personal struggle had opened hearts, but now a larger battle was being asked of him. The battle of technology versus humanity. Sundar leaned forward, his hands pressed firmly on the podium. His eyes scanned the crowd, his expression solemn. "That," he said slowly, "is the hardest question of all. And perhaps tonight, it is time to face it." The question that shook the hall. The room had grown colder, or at least it felt that way. The question lingered in the air like smoke that refused to fade. Technology divides as much as it connects. It spreads hate as much as it spreads love. How can kindness survive in a world where machines are stronger than hearts? The voice had come from the back, from a man who did not reveal his name but whose words carried the doubts of millions outside that hall. Sundar paused. His hands gripped the podium, not with nervousness, but with the awareness that this was not a question he could answer lightly. This was no longer about his personal story, his struggles, or his resilience. This was about the world itself, about every person who held a smartphone in their hand, every child who opened a laptop, every family who relied on the internet to connect and survive. He drew a long breath, and when he spoke, his voice was steady, thoughtful, but filled with gravity. "It is true," he said. "Technology is like fire. Fire can warm your home, but it can also burn it down. Fire can light the path of travelers, but it can also destroy entire forests. Technology is no different. The same tools that let us connect can also be used to spread hate. The same platforms that give voice to the voiceless can also give power to lies." The audience listened in silence, their faces heavy with thought. Sundar's words were not a defense nor an excuse. They were an admission of truth. "But," Sundar continued, his voice rising with conviction, "fire has always existed. What matters is how we choose to use it. Do we guard it, nurture it, and use it to protect each other? Or do we let it run wild, unchecked, until it destroys us? Technology will never decide that for us. It is not the machine that chooses. It is us. It is the human heart. The crowd erupted in applause, but Sundar lifted his hand gently to quiet them. He wasn't finished. You ask how kindness can survive, he said. The answer is, it must not just survive, it must lead. Algorithms may shape our feeds, but it is kindness that shapes our choices. Machines may calculate faster than us, but they cannot forgive. They cannot comfort, they cannot understand the pain in a mother's eyes or the hope in a child's smile. That is why kindness is stronger than any code. It is the one thing that machines cannot copy. The audience broke into tears, applause mixing with sobs. Even those who had come to challenge him now found themselves touched by the raw force of his words. Modi ji nodded slowly, his gaze deep as though measuring the meaning not only for the room, but for the future of an entire nation. Then Sundar leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, drawing everyone back into silence. But I will tell you something, he said. If we fail to remember this, if we let machines run ahead without guiding them with humanity, then we risk building a world where no one belongs. A world where numbers matter more than people and speed matters more than truth. That is not progress. It is emptiness, and it is our responsibility to stop it. For a moment, the hall seemed to tremble with the weight of his warning. Parents looked at their children. Young students stared at their phones as if seeing them differently, and leaders in the audience exchanged glances, aware that this was not just a speech, but a call to action. Then Sundar turned, unexpectedly, toward Modi ji. Prime Minister, he said, his voice clear. The question is not only for me. It is for all of us. Will we build a future where technology serves humanity, or will we allow it to divide us? Will India, with its wisdom and resilience, lead the world in kindness through technology, or will it follow the same mistakes others have made? The hall gasped. Never before had anyone spoken to Modi ji so directly on such a stage. Journalists raised their cameras higher, eager to capture not just the image but the history being made in words. Modi ji's face remained calm, but his silence was heavy, as though his mind was weighing 1,000 possible answers. Sundar waited. The crowd waited. And then Modi ji slowly rose to his feet, his eyes steady, his posture commanding. He placed his hand gently on the podium, leaned toward the microphone and said, Sundar, you are right. The question is for all of us, and I will answer it. The room froze. The Prime Minister of India was about to speak, not with the polished lines of politics, but with a response to a challenge that had shaken the hall. Sundar stepped back, his eyes locked on Modi ji, and for the first time that night the roles shifted. Now it was not Sundar's voice, but Modi ji's, that the entire world leaned in to hear. The promise. The hall was alive with tension. The applause had faded. The murmurs had died down. And yet the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Sundar stood quietly at the side, his eyes fixed on Modi ji, who had just promised to answer the challenge placed before him. Never before had the atmosphere in a hall been so charged, as if every person present knew that whatever came next would not simply end a speech. It would begin a story that the world would carry with it. Modi ji's voice was calm, but it carried a depth that immediately pulled every ear closer. Sundar, he said, turning slightly to look at him. Your question is not for me alone. It is for every person sitting here, every family outside, every child holding a device that connects them to the world. But because you asked, I will answer, and I will answer with honesty. He paused, scanning the room. His eyes touched the faces of students, parents, leaders, and journalists, making each person feel as though the weight of his words belonged to them. You are right, he said finally. Technology has divided as much as it has united. It has built walls even as it has built bridges. It has brought knowledge to villages, but it has also brought noise. It has given people a voice, but it has also given rise to anger, lies, and fear. And yet to abandon it would be like abandoning the future itself. So what must we do? The hall remained silent, but the silence was not empty. It was waiting. We must lead with kindness, Modi ji declared, his voice rising with conviction. India cannot compete with the world by building bigger machines alone. We must lead by building bigger hearts. Our culture has always taught us that respect comes before power. If we can bring that truth into technology, then we will not only change India, we will change the world. The hall exploded in applause, louder than any heard that night. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, crying. The sound shook the walls, yet within that noise was a unity that felt rare, precious. Sundar watched quietly, his eyes shining. He had asked his question not to challenge, but to remind the world that progress without kindness is emptiness. And now to hear the Prime Minister of India speak those words aloud, to witness that promise in front of thousands, was a moment he knew he would carry forever. But Modi ji was not finished. He turned again, this time addressing Sundar directly. Sundar, you walked away from the podium earlier, reminding us that humility is greater than applause. Tonight, I want to walk toward you, reminding you that leadership is not about standing above people, but standing beside them. With those words, Modi ji stepped forward, reached out and embraced Sundar. It was not a political gesture, nor a staged moment. It was simple, human, and powerful. The cameras flashed, but for once, the light did not distract. It only illuminated the truth of the moment. The audience roared, yet amidst the thunder, a deep stillness lingered in every heart. People realized they were witnessing not just an exchange of words, but the meeting of two worlds: politics and technology, power and humility, vision and respect. Sundar leaned into the microphone once more, his voice barely audible over the cheers. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you not just for these words, but for reminding us that kindness is not weakness. It is strength. And tonight, I believe we have all seen what strength truly means."